are considered to be one and the same, people have trouble finding a distinction between the two. So what exactly is the difference between an extremist and a terrorist? An extremist is a person who holds extreme views about something, usually in the sense of political or religious extremities. Terrorists, on the other hand, are people who use terror to gain something or to make a point. They are, in essence, someone who terrorizes. Someone must be an extremist in order to be a terrorist. They need to believe in something so vehemently that killing or harming innocents to make a point is worth it. An extremist, however, is not always a terrorist. Someone can be extremely kind, extremely intolerant, or extremely racist without ever committing or condoning acts of terror. Due to a pervasive atmosphere of misinformation and fear-mongering, people in the West have come to associate extremism and terrorism almost exclusively with those of the Islamic faith. This, in turn, has led to widespread misconceptions about Muslims, Islam, and terrorist threats. For example, most countries think that their population is much more Muslim than it actually is. When asked what percentage of the U.S. population identifies as Muslim, citizens estimated that 17% of the U.S. population is Muslim. In fact, Muslims make up only 1% of the U.S. population. Likewise, society often views the likelihood of death by a terrorist attack as much more common than it actually is. The chance of death by a terrorist attack is 1 in 20 million. Although statistical evidence proves otherwise, American citizens consider a terrorist attack to be one of the leading threats to their safety and well-being. In reality, though, your chance of being murdered is 253 times as great as dying in a terrorist attack committed by a foreigner on U.S. soil.
What is Islamic extremism? Our common perceptions of Islamic extremism are usually based on images like these. However, its true meaning is more complex. Islamic extremism can be defined as the use of violent tactics, such as bombings and assassinations, to achieve perceived Islamic goals, or an extremely conservative view of Islam that does not necessarily advocate violence. Some of the elements of Islamic extremism are a belief that extreme ideology is a comprehensive way of life, the idea that the failure of Muslim societies is due to their adoption of Western secularism, or the idea that the renewal of society requires a return to Islam through a social reformation or revolution inspired by the Quran and the Prophet Muhammad. So what are the causes of Islamic extremism? A social cause is political corruption, which results in the belief that the political system has become immoral and needs to be transformed through an Islamic revolution. A more religious or ideological cause is cultural globalization, where the influx of Western culture and materialism into majority Muslim countries caused some Muslims to fear that Islamic values are being lost and that Westernization should be violently opposed. So in general, do Muslims support Islamic extremism? The following survey conducted by the Pew Research Center in 11 majority Muslim countries found that the majority of Muslims oppose Islamic extremism. This runs counter to the dominant narrative that most Muslims support or are sympathetic to extremism.
The far right has frequently been considered one of the biggest threats to American security and government. According to the Washington Research Center New America, between 9/11 and 2015, twice as many people were killed by white supremacists and non-Muslim extremists than by radical Muslims. There have been 19 attacks carried out by non-Muslim extremists, while there were only 7 lethal attacks carried out by Islamic militants, yet far-right extremists are hardly ever covered in the media. So now that we know the magnitude of these attacks, the question becomes, who is responsible for them? The answer is hate groups that follow extreme ideologies often characterized by white supremacy or the use of the Bible. Hate groups date back to the Reconstruction era and the formation of the Ku Klux Klan as a response to the end of slavery. They terrorized many Southern communities to scare Black individuals and their allies to prevent them from voting and living freely. The movement disbanded and re-emerged twice since then. Their movement quelled with the peace of mind Jim Crow laws gave them, but resurged in 1925 to oppose the influx in Catholic and Jewish immigration, where it reached its height of 4 million members. However, the Great Depression once again caused them to fade, but they were nonetheless reinvigorated when the Civil Rights Movement began in the 1960s. Though the Klan has never been able to reach its previous numbers of membership, they are still present in at least 30 American states. Groups even more prevalent today include the members of the Army of God, a violent Christian organization that emerged in the 1980s as a way of opposing abortion rights and gay rights because they are in defiance with the Word of God. They are responsible for the deaths of multiple abortion doctors. They have also claimed responsibility for the bombing of Atlanta's Olympic Park in 1996 and the bombing of a lesbian bar in Atlanta in 1997. In addition to this, they have praised Saudi Arabia for their execution of gay men in 2002 and have tried to instill fear in clinics and advocacy organizations for abortion through anthrax scares on multiple occasions. They use whatever means necessary to further their ideologies and scare others into accepting their behavior. Both the Army of God and the KKK are listed as hate groups, meaning that they are allowed to organize, hold rallies, and fundraise for their causes. This also means that when they do get in trouble with the law, they are charged with hate crimes, which is just an enhancement of charges that say the act was motivated by a bias in race, gender, religion, disability, ethnicity, or orientation. Conversely, those groups such as ISIS and Al-Qaeda are considered terrorist groups and therefore face terrorism charges. When the facts are looked at, groups like the KKK and ISIS are more alike than they are different. They both set off bombs and commit murder and other violent acts. They both use these tactics to strike fear into those who they perceive as their enemies, and they both do so in the defense of their belief system. So if there is no discernible difference between the two, other than their race and their religious beliefs they use, the question stands, should America's far-right hate groups be treated as terrorists, or should those we perceive as terrorists be considered mere hate groups in the name of pursuing fair and equal punishment for equal crimes under the American law?
This bar graph shows the number of Muslim American suspects and perpetrators of terror in the 10-year period between 9/11 and the year 2011. There are 172 individuals, only 47 of which successfully carried out their attack. Of these, only 33 people were killed in that 10-year period, both home and abroad, by terror. Furthermore, World Health Organization estimates that only 50 out of the estimated 150,000 deaths a day are a result of terrorism, so clearly this phenomenon is not as prevalent as it often seems to be. Despite this though, fear of extremism is common in the United States in rates which are not proportional to the actual threat that Islamic terror poses. As you can see in this graph, 53% of the United States population describe themselves as very worried about Islamic extremism. This number jumps to more like 62% globally, despite how uncommon these attacks truly are. In contrast, the Triangle Center on Terrorism and Homeland Security released a statement saying that law enforcement agencies in the United States consider anti-government violent extremists, not radicalized Muslims, to be the most severe threat of political violence that they face. This photograph is of two such extremists, Glendon Crawford and Eric Fate. They were arrested by the FBI when they attempted to manufacture a radiation device which they plan to use against Muslim Americans as well as on government officials at the governor's mansion in Albany, New York, and at the White House. Although this particular plot failed, many have not, and it is estimated that in the period since 2002, right-wing extremism has killed 48 people domestically, a higher number than Islamic extremism. So why do people view Islamic extremism as more of a risk to the safety of themselves and to their families? The answers are varied, from fear of those who are unlike them to outright xenophobia and racism. However, one of the biggest reasons for this disconnect is overrepresentation of attacks by Muslims in the media. They are covered in more detail and therefore command greater attention than those attacks committed by Christian radicals.